They mocked a black nurse who barely spoke, who kept her head down and avoided eye contact. They whispered she was a diversity hire, too slow, too weak for the emergency room. When she dared to question a doctor's diagnosis, he humiliated her in front of everyone. The hospital director signed her termination papers without hesitation. But before Amada Bennett could collect her belongings, the sky above the hospital split open with the thunder of military rotors. A Navy Black Hawk descended onto the parking lot, and armed men stormed through the doors asking only one question: "Where is our SEAL combat medic?" The fluorescent lights of Metro General Hospital buzzed overhead as Amada Bennett walked through the emergency department doors for the first time. She wore plain scrubs, no makeup, her natural hair pulled back in a simple bun. Everything about her appearance was deliberately unremarkable. The head nurse, Maria Santos, greeted her with a warm smile. Maria was a seasoned Latina woman in her 50s, with kind eyes that had seen decades of hospital politics and still managed to retain their humanity. "Amada Bennett, welcome to Metro General. I'll show you around." Amada nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." As they walked through the chaotic emergency department, Maria pointed out the trauma bays, the supply rooms, the break area. Doctors rushed past them without acknowledgement. Nurses hurried between patients, their faces etched with exhaustion. They stopped outside the main nursing station where Dr. Richard Hayes stood reviewing charts. He was a tall man in his mid-40s, his white coat pristine, his posture radiating authority. Maria cleared her throat. "Dr. Hayes, this is Amada Bennett, our new ER nurse." Hayes glanced up briefly, his eyes scanning Amada from head to toe in less than 2 seconds. He didn't extend his hand. He didn't smile. He simply returned to his charts and said, "Make sure she knows where everything is. We're short-staffed tonight." Then he walked away. Maria squeezed Amada's shoulder. "Don't take it personally. He's like that with everyone." But Amada had seen the look in his eyes. She knew exactly what it meant. She had seen it before in different contexts from different people. The look that said she didn't belong, that she wasn't enough. She said nothing. During her lunch break, Amada sat alone in the corner of the break room, eating a sandwich she had brought from home. 2 nurses at a nearby table spoke in hushed tones, but not hushed enough. "Another diversity hire," one of them said, a blonde woman named Jessica. "I heard they needed to meet their quota this quarter." The other nurse, a younger woman with red hair, giggled. $10 says she doesn't last a month? Did you see how she just stands there like she's scared of her own shadow?" Amada continued eating her sandwich, her expression unchanged. She had heard worse. She had survived worse. Later that evening, Maria found Amada restocking supplies in the medication room. The older nurse leaned against the doorframe, studying her with curious eyes. "You know," Maria said, "I've been doing this job for 25 years. I've seen a lot of nurses come and go, but there's something different about you." Amada kept her eyes on the shelves. "I'm just here to do my job." "That's what they all say." Maria smiled gently. "Look, I know this department can be brutal. The hierarchy here is carved in stone, and people like Hayes think nurses are just tools to hand them instruments. But you don't have to face it alone. Coffee tomorrow morning." For the first time since arriving, Amada allowed a small smile to cross her face. "Maybe." Maria nodded, satisfied with that answer, and left. That night, Amada lay in her small apartment staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. It never came easily anymore. When she finally drifted off, the nightmares were waiting. She was back in Yemen. The desert air was thick with smoke and the metallic smell of blood. Marcus lay in her arms, his chest torn open by shrapnel, his blood soaking through her uniform. Her hands worked frantically, desperately trying to stop the bleeding that wouldn't stop. "Stay with me," she begged. "Marcus, stay with me." His hand found hers, weak but warm. His eyes, those beautiful brown eyes that had looked at her with love for 3 years, were fading. "You did everything you could," he whispered. "Don't blame yourself. Promise me. No, 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 you're going to be fine. I can fix this. I can. But his hand went limp. His eyes went still. And Amada screamed into the darkness of the desert night. She woke up gasping, her sheets soaked with sweat. The clock read 3:17 in the morning. She sat on the edge of her bed, her head in her hands, and whispered to the empty room, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." 3 weeks passed. Amada learned the rhythms of Metro General, the unspoken rules, the invisible boundaries. She did her job quietly, efficiently, never drawing attention to herself. She noticed things other nurses missed. She moved with a precision that seemed almost mechanical. But she never spoke up, never challenged, never stood out. Until the night, everything changed. It was a Friday and the emergency department was overwhelmed. A multi-car accident on the highway had flooded them with trauma patients. Every bed was full. Every doctor was stretched thin. The air crackled with tension and exhaustion. A middle-aged man was brought in complaining of chest pain. Dr. Hayes examined him briefly, checked his vitals, and made his diagnosis within minutes. "Anxiety attack," Hayes declared, already turning away. "Give him a mild sedative and discharge him. We need this bed." Amada stood nearby, watching the patient. Something wasn't right. She noticed the thin sheen of sweat on his pale forehead, despite the cool temperature. She noticed the way his left hand kept moving to his arm. She noticed the subtle irregularity in his breathing. She stepped closer, checking his pulse manually. His heartbeat was erratic, skipping beats in a pattern she recognized immediately. "Dr. Hayes," she said, her voice steady but soft, "I think we should run an enzyme panel. His symptoms are consistent with—" Hayes spun around, his face twisted with irritation. "Excuse me? His diaphoresis, the radiating pain to his left arm, the irregular pulse. These could indicate acute myocardial infarction if we just— Did you go to medical school?" Hayes cut her off, his voice loud enough for the entire department to hear. "Do you have an MD after your name?" Amada felt the weight of every eye in the room. Jessica and the red-haired nurse exchanged smirks. Other staff members stopped what they were doing to watch. "No, but—" "Then perhaps you should stick to what you're qualified for." Hayes stepped closer, towering over her. "Which is following orders, not playing doctor because you read something on WebMD." He turned to the room, gesturing dismissively. "Discharge this patient, and someone remind the new hire what her job actually is." Amada stood frozen as Hayes walked away. The patient looked at her with confused, frightened eyes. She wanted to say something. She wanted to fight. But the words died in her throat. She stepped back. She lowered her head. She did what she had trained herself to do for the past 2 years. She stayed silent. 20 minutes later, the scream came from bed 7. The middle-aged man was convulsing his monitors, shrieking alarms. Code blue, cardiac arrest. Dr. Hayes ran to the bedside, shouting orders that came out jumbled and panicked. Nurses scrambled for equipment. The crash cart was wheeled in. Chaos erupted. Amada stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. Inside her chest, 2 voices waged war. One voice whispered, "This isn't your place. You're just a nurse. Stay invisible. Stay safe." The other voice, the one she had buried for 2 years, roared, "He's dying. You know exactly what to do. You've done it dozens of times in worse conditions than this." Hayes was fumbling with the defibrillator, his hands shaking. The patient's oxygen levels were plummeting. Seconds were ticking away. Amada made her choice. She pushed through the crowd, gently but firmly moving a nurse aside. Her hands found the patient's chest, positioning themselves with muscle memory forged in combat zones. "What the hell are you doing?" Hayes shouted. Amada didn't answer. She began chest compressions. Her technique flawless, her rhythm perfect. Her voice came out calm, commanding, completely unlike the quiet woman they had dismissed for weeks. "Epinephrine 1 milligram IV push. Charge the defibrillator to 200 joules. A nurse hesitated, looking at Hayes. Amada didn't waver. "Now!" Something in her voice made them obey. The medication was administered, the defibrillator charged. Clear. She shocked him once. No response. Continue compressions. Another round of epi, charged to 300. Hayes stood frozen watching this woman who had transformed before his eyes. Gone was the timid nurse who couldn't meet anyone's gaze. In her place was someone who moved with the precision of a surgeon and the authority of a general. Clear. Second shock. The monitor flickered. Then, like a miracle, a rhythm appeared. Weak but present. Alive. The patient was breathing. His heart was beating. He was going to live. Amada stepped back, her chest heaving. The adrenaline that had carried her through began to fade, and she realized what she had done. She had exposed herself. She had broken every rule she had set for her new life. The room was silent. Everyone stared at her. And in Dr. Hayes's eyes, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Not gratitude, not admiration. Fury. The next morning, Amada stood in the administrative wing of Metro General, facing Dr. Hayes and the hospital director, a stern woman named Patricia Caldwell. The office felt suffocating, the walls closing in with every word spoken. What you did last night was completely unacceptable. Hayes said, his voice controlled but seething with barely contained rage. You administered medication without authorization. You operated medical equipment beyond your certification. You undermined my authority in front of the entire department. Amada kept her eyes forward, her hands clasped behind her back. Old habits. Military habits. The patient survived, she said quietly. That's not the point. Director Caldwell leaned forward in her chair, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed a file. Ms. Bennett, you've been with us for less than a month. In that time, you've shown a pattern of overstepping. Dr. Hayes has noted multiple instances where you've questioned his judgment. I questioned his judgment once, last night, and I was right. Hayes slammed his hand on the desk. You were lucky. There's a difference. Amada finally looked at him directly. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, something dangerous that made Hayes unconsciously take a step back, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar mask of quiet compliance. You're right, she said. I overstepped. It won't happen again. But Director Caldwell was already sliding a document across the desk. I'm afraid it's too late for apologies. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Please collect your personal belongings and return your badge to security. Amada looked at the termination letter. Her name was printed in cold official typeface. 3 weeks. That's all it had taken for this new life to crumble. I understand, she said. She stood, turned, and walked out of the office without another word. Maria was waiting in the hallway, her face etched with concern. She fell into step beside Amada as she walked toward the nursing station. I heard what happened. Amada, this isn't fair. That patient would be dead if it weren't for you. Fair doesn't exist, Maria. I learned that a long time ago. They reached the nursing station where Amada's small locker was located. She began removing her few personal items, a spare hair tie, a photograph she kept face down that no one had ever seen, a worn paperback novel she never had time to read. Maria watched her frustration and sadness warring on her face. Where will you go? Amada placed her belongings in a small cardboard box. I'll figure something out. I always do. You know, Maria said softly. In 25 years, I've seen a lot of nurses. Good ones, bad ones, mediocre ones. But I've never seen anyone do what you did last night. The way you moved, the way you took command, that wasn't luck and it wasn't WebMD. That was something else entirely. Amada's hands stilled over the box. For a moment, she considered telling Maria the truth. About who she really was. About what she had done. About why she had run away from it all. But the words wouldn't come. Thank you for being kind to me, Amada said instead. You were the only one. She picked up her box and began walking toward the exit. That's when the sound came. At first it was just a distant thumping like a heartbeat in the sky, but it grew louder, closer, more insistent. The windows began to rattle. Papers on desks fluttered and flew. Patients in their beds looked up in confusion. Amada stopped walking. She knew that sound. She had heard it hundreds of times in places most people only saw in news reports. The distinctive rhythm of military-grade rotors, the heavy percussion of a Black Hawk helicopter. Through the emergency department's glass doors, she watched as the aircraft descended onto the parking lot like a predator claiming territory. Cars were pushed aside by the force of the rotor wash. A medical transport van nearly tipped over. Security guards ran toward the landing site, shouting into their radios. Before the rotors had even slowed, 4 men emerged from the helicopter. They wore tactical gear, moved in formation, and carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of elite soldiers. They didn't walk. They advanced. They pushed through the emergency department doors without hesitation, ignoring the protests of security guards and the shocked stares of hospital staff. The lead man was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark skin weathered by years of combat deployments, his eyes scanning the room with predatory efficiency. "Doctor." Hayes stepped into their path, his face flushed with indignation. "Excuse me, this is a civilian hospital. You can't just—" The lead soldier looked at Hayes as if he were an insect. "Where is Ghost?" Hayes blinked. "What? Who?" The soldier raised his voice, addressing the entire emergency department. "Nurse Amada Bennett, codename Ghost. Where is she?" Silence fell over the room. Every head turned, searching for the person these armed men were seeking with such urgency. Amada stood frozen at the end of the hallway, her cardboard box still in her hands. She felt the weight of every stare, the confusion radiating from her former colleagues, the dawning recognition in Maria's eyes. The lead soldier spotted her. His expression, hard as granite, softened almost imperceptibly. He strode toward her, his team falling in behind him. "Ghost," he said when he reached her. "Thank God. We need you. Tyler is down." Amada's face went pale. "Jake, what are you doing here?" Chief Petty Officer Jake Morales was her former team leader, the man who had recruited her into the SEAL medical program 8 years ago. The man who had stood beside her at Marcus's memorial service. "Tyler took shrapnel during a classified op," Jake said, his voice low and urgent. "Depleted uranium fragment lodged 3 millimeters from his aorta. No civilian surgeon will touch it. The military hospital is 90 minutes away. He's got maybe 30 minutes. Tyler Reed. The name brought a flood of memories. The young medic she had trained before leaving the service. The kid who had reminded her so much of herself. He's in the bird, bleeding out. You're the only person who's ever successfully extracted DU shrapnel from that location. Fallujah 2019. Remember? She remembered. A soldier named Patterson wounded by an IED. The same impossible location. 12 hours of surgery in a field hospital while mortars fell around them. She had saved him with nothing but steady hands and sheer will. Behind her, Amada heard the murmuring of her former colleagues. She heard Hayes's voice, sharp with disbelief, demanding to know what was happening. She heard someone whisper the word SEAL with incredulous emphasis. Jake gripped her shoulder, forcing her to focus on him. "Ghost, I know you left. I know why. But Tyler is going to die if you don't help him. Right here. Right now." Amada's hands began to tremble. The box slipped from her fingers, spilling its contents across the floor. The photograph landed face up, revealing a younger Amada in desert camouflage, standing beside a smiling man with kind eyes. Marcus. The memories crashed over her like a wave. The blood, the screaming, the helplessness of watching someone she loved die in her arms, despite everything she knew, everything she could do. "I can't," she whispered. "Jake, I can't. I left that life behind. I can't go back. You don't have to go back to the battlefield. You just have to go to that helicopter and do what you were born to do. Dr. Hayes pushed his way through the crowd, his face a mask of confusion and wounded pride. Will someone please explain what is going on? This woman is a nurse. She was just terminated for overstepping her. Jake turned on him with barely controlled fury. A nurse. This woman spent 8 years with SEAL Team 6. She has more confirmed saves in combat zones than any medic in naval special warfare history. She holds a silver star and 2 Purple Hearts. She has operated on wounded soldiers in conditions you can't even imagine with equipment you've never seen under fire that would make you wet yourself. He stepped closer to Hayes, towering over the doctor. She is the reason 47 American service members went home to their families instead of in body bags. So when you call her just a nurse, you're not insulting her. You're insulting every person she's ever saved, every sacrifice she's ever made, and every nightmare she still has because of what she's done for her country. Hayes stood speechless, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Maria stared at Amada as if seeing her for the first time. "Oh my God," she breathed. Amada barely heard them. Her mind was somewhere else, somewhere dark and bloody and filled with the sound of Marcus's last breath. "I couldn't save him," she said, her voice breaking. "Marcus, I couldn't save him. If I fail again—" Jake's expression softened. He took both her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I know about Marcus. I know what happened in Yemen. I know that's why you ran. But Amada Marcus didn't die because you failed. He died because some wounds can't be fixed, no matter how good you are. You know that. He knew that." Tears welled in Amada's eyes. "I promised myself I'd never go back. I can't lose anyone else. Tyler is 28 years old. He has a wife and a baby daughter he's never met. She was born 3 weeks ago while he was deployed. If he dies today, that little girl grows up without a father. And the only person in the world who can prevent that is standing right in front of me telling me she can't." Amada closed her eyes. She saw Marcus's face pale and peaceful in death. She heard his last words, the ones that haunted her every night. "Don't blame yourself. Promise me." She had never been able to keep that promise. The guilt had consumed her, driven her away from everything she knew, everything she was. She had tried to become someone else, someone ordinary, someone who couldn't be destroyed by loss. But standing here with Tyler's life hanging in the balance, she realized the truth she had been running from for 2 years. She couldn't escape who she was, and maybe she wasn't supposed to. Amada opened her eyes. The tears were still there, but something else had replaced the fear. Something cold and focused and utterly determined. "Where is he?" she asked. Jake's face flooded with relief. "The helicopter. We have everything you need." Amada turned and walked toward the exit, her stride no longer hesitant or shuffling. She moved with purpose, with authority, with the bearing of someone who had commanded respect in the most dangerous places on earth. The crowd parted before her. Nurses who had mocked her stepped aside. Doctors who had dismissed her watched in stunned silence. She didn't look at any of them, but she stopped beside Maria. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you who I was," Amada said quietly. "I wasn't ready to be that person again." Maria's eyes glistened with tears. "Go. Save him. We'll talk later." Amada continued walking, pushing through the emergency department doors into the harsh sunlight. The Blackhawk sat on the parking lot asphalt, its rotors still spinning at idle. 2 SEAL operators stood guard beside it, their weapons ready. Inside the helicopter, Tyler Reed lay on a stretcher, his face gray, his breathing shallow. Medical monitors beeped urgent warnings. A field medic knelt beside him, applying pressure to a wound in his abdomen that oozed dark blood. Amada climbed into the helicopter and knelt beside Tyler. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with pain. "Ghost," he mumbled. "Is that you?" "It's me, Tyler. I'm here." They said you quit. Said you disappeared. I did. Amada examined the wound, her trained eyes assessing the damage in seconds. The depleted uranium fragment was visible on the portable X-ray the field medic had taken. 3 millimeters from the aorta. One wrong move and he would bleed out in seconds. But I'm back now, she said, and I'm going to fix this. She looked up at Jake. I can't do this in a helicopter. I need a proper surgical suite, fluoroscopy imaging, and microsurgical instruments. The military hospital is too far. I know. Amada's jaw tightened. We'll use the hospital here. Their OR has everything I need. Will they let us? Amada looked back toward Metro General, where Dr. Hayes and Director Caldwell stood at the emergency department doors, watching everything unfold. They don't have a choice. She jumped down from the helicopter and strode toward them, Jake and his team close behind. Hayes tried to stand his ground, but something in Amada's eyes made him falter. I need your surgical suite, she said. It wasn't a request. Operating room 2 has the fluoroscopy equipment I need. I need it prepped in 5 minutes. Director Caldwell shook her head. Ms. Bennett, you were just terminated. You have no privileges at this hospital. I can't allow... That man has a piece of depleted uranium shrapnel lodged 3 millimeters from his aorta, Amada interrupted. If I don't remove it in the next 20 minutes, he dies. The nearest military facility is 90 minutes away. You are his only chance. We have surgeons on staff who can... No, you don't. Amada's voice was flat final. No civilian surgeon has ever performed this procedure. The military has done it exactly 4 times in history. I performed 2 of them. The other 2 surgeons are currently deployed overseas. Jake stepped forward. Director, the United States Navy is formally requesting emergency access to your surgical facilities for a classified medical procedure. We will take full legal and financial responsibility for everything that happens. But we need access now. Caldwell looked at Hayes, who seemed to have aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. He offered no guidance, no protest. He simply stood there, confronting the wreckage of every assumption he had ever made. Fine, Caldwell said finally. Or 2. I'll have the staff prep it immediately. Amada was already moving barking orders with the efficiency of someone who had spent years commanding medical teams in crisis situations. I need type O negative blood standing by. Microsurgical instrument tray. Someone get me Dr. Patterson from radiology. I need the best fluoroscopy tech you have. And clear the observation gallery. No one watches who doesn't need to be there. Nurses scrambled to obey. The same nurses who had whispered about her, laughed at her, dismissed her as a diversity hire. Now they jumped at her commands without question. Maria fell into step beside her as they rushed toward the surgical wing. What can I do? Stay close. I might need an extra pair of hands. They reached the operating room where staff were already preparing the space with frantic efficiency. Amada scrubbed in her hands, moving through the familiar motions with mechanical precision. Through the window, she could see Jake and his team standing guard in the hallway. She could see Director Caldwell and Dr. Hayes watching from behind the glass of the observation gallery. And she could see Tyler being wheeled in his life measured in minutes, his fate resting entirely in her hands. The same hands that had failed to save Marcus. For a moment the doubt returned, the fear, the crushing weight of responsibility that had driven her away from this life. Then she looked at Tyler's face, pale and young and fighting for every breath. She thought of his wife waiting at home, his daughter 3 weeks old who had never felt her father's arms around her. She thought of Marcus's final words, "Don't blame yourself." And she understood finally what he had meant. Not that she should forget, not that she should stop caring, but that she should keep going, keep fighting, keep saving the ones she could even if she couldn't save them all. Amada pulled on her surgical gloves and stepped up to the operating table. Okay, Tyler, she said softly. Let's bring you home. The fluoroscopy monitor cast an eerie glow across the operating room as Amada studied the image of Tyler's chest cavity. The depleted uranium fragment sat like a tiny demon nestled against the wall of his aorta. One slip of her instruments, One tremor in her hands, and the largest artery in his body would rupture. Maria stood beside her, serving as surgical assistant. The hospital's best radiology technician operated the fluoroscopy equipment, providing real-time imaging of every millimeter Amada navigated. Outside the observation window, Jake and his team watched in tense silence. Dr. Hayes stood among them, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Director Caldwell had positioned herself near the door, as if ready to flee at the first sign of disaster. Amada blocked them all out. The world narrowed to the space between her hands and Tyler's heart. "Scalpel!" Maria placed the instrument in her palm. Amada made her first incision with the precision of a master artist, cutting through layers of tissue to expose the wound channel. Blood welled up immediately, dark and insistent. "Suction." The field cleared. Amada could see the fragment now, not just on the monitor, but with her own eyes. A jagged piece of metal, no larger than a fingernail, carrying enough destructive potential to end a young man's life. She inserted the microsurgical forceps, guiding them toward the fragment with movements so small they were almost imperceptible. The fluoroscopy monitor showed the instruments closing in millimeter by agonizing millimeter. Her hands began to tremble. Not now. Please, not now. The image of Marcus flashed through her mind, his blood on her hands, his eyes going dim, the weight of his body as he slipped away from her. "Amada." Maria's voice was soft but urgent. "Your hands." Amada looked down. The forceps were shaking their tips, dancing dangerously close to the aortic wall. One wrong move, 1 centimeter to the left. Tyler would die on this table just like Marcus had died in her arms. She closed her eyes and took a breath. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw Marcus again. But this time he wasn't dying. He was smiling the way he used to smile at her across crowded mess halls and dusty combat outposts. "Don't blame yourself," he had said. But there was more to those words than she had understood. It wasn't just about accepting his death. It was about accepting that she had done everything she could. That her hands, these hands, had saved countless lives and would save countless more. That she was enough. Amada opened her eyes. Her hands were steady. "Continuing extraction," she said calmly. The forceps closed around the fragment with delicate precision. Amada began to withdraw, pulling the deadly metal away from the aorta 1 fraction of a millimeter at a time. The fluoroscopy monitor tracked every movement, showing the narrowing gap between safety and catastrophe. 30 minutes passed. Then 40. Sweat beaded on Amada's forehead, but she didn't dare ask anyone to wipe it away. Her entire being was focused on the task, her consciousness narrowed to a single point of absolute concentration. The fragment came free. Blood sprayed from the wound, painting Amada's surgical gown in crimson. The monitors screamed warnings as Tyler's blood pressure plummeted. "Clamp!" Amada commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I need a vascular clamp now!" Maria slapped the instrument into her hand. Amada moved with speed that seemed impossible, her fingers finding the source of the bleeding and applying pressure with surgical precision. "Suture. Fluoroproline." She began to repair the damage, her needle moving in and out of the torn tissue with the rhythm of a heartbeat. Each stitch was perfect, placed with the expertise of someone who had performed this procedure in far worse conditions. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. Tyler's vitals stabilized. His heart rhythm, erratic for the past hour, settled into a steady, healthy pattern. Amada stepped back from the table, her legs suddenly weak. She looked at the metal fragment sitting in the surgical tray, this tiny piece of destruction that had almost claimed another life. But not today. "He's stable," she announced. "Close him up and transfer to the ICU for monitoring." She stripped off her gloves and walked out of the operating room without looking back. In the hallway, Jake was waiting. His face, usually so controlled, broke into an expression of pure relief. He grabbed Amada in a bear hug that lifted her off her feet. "You did it," he said into her hair. "You crazy, beautiful genius. You did it." "Put me down, Jake. I can't breathe." He set her down but kept his hands on her shoulders as if afraid she might disappear again. Tyler's wife is on her way. She wants to thank you personally. Amada shook her head. She doesn't need to thank me. Just tell her to take care of that baby girl. Tell her Tyler's coming home. The other SEAL operators gathered around, clapping her on the back, calling her Ghost with reverent affection. For a moment, Amada allowed herself to feel the warmth of belonging to something larger than herself. Then she saw Dr. Hayes standing at the edge of the group apart from the celebration. Their eyes met. He walked toward her slowly, his usual arrogance stripped away, leaving something raw and uncomfortable in its place. The other SEALs parted to let him through, their expressions hostile. Hayes stopped in front of Amada. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke. I didn't know. Amada studied his face, searching for the contempt she had grown accustomed to. But it wasn't there anymore. In its place was something that looked almost like shame. You didn't want to know, she said quietly. You saw what you expected to see, a black woman who couldn't possibly belong in your world. It was easier to dismiss me than to question your assumptions. Hayes flinched at her words but didn't look away. You're right. I was wrong. About everything. Yes, you were. Amada's voice held no anger, only exhaustion and a deep, bone-weary sadness. But I'm not telling you this so you'll apologize to me. I'm telling you because next time someone speaks up, someone who doesn't look like what you expect, maybe you'll listen before you judge. Maybe you'll remember that the quietest person in the room might know more than everyone else combined. She didn't wait for his response. She turned and walked away, leaving Hayes standing alone with the weight of his failures. Maria caught up with her near the emergency department entrance. The older nurse's eyes were red-rimmed, her cheeks wet with tears she hadn't bothered to wipe away. What happens now? Maria asked. Amada stopped walking and faced the woman who had shown her kindness when no one else would. Now I stop running. I spent 2 years trying to be invisible, trying to hide from my past. But it turns out you can't run from who you are. You can only choose what to do with it. Maria embraced her tightly. Will I see you again? Maybe. Somewhere down the road. The next morning, Amada stood in the hospital parking lot, a military duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The Black Hawk had been replaced by a standard Navy transport vehicle, less dramatic but equally purposeful. Jake leaned against the vehicle, waiting. When he saw her approaching, he straightened. So, he said, what's the verdict? The team wants you back. Command has already approved your reinstatement. Amada shook her head. I'm not going back to the field. That part of my life is over. Jake's face fell. Then what? Training. Amada looked toward the horizon where the sun was just beginning to rise. I want to teach the next generation of combat medics. Everything I know, everything I learned, every technique that kept me alive and kept my patients alive. I want to pass it on. Jake considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. We could use you at the training facility in Virginia. The new medics coming through, they're good, but they're green. They need someone who's been where they're going. Then that's where I'll be. She turned back toward the hospital one last time. Maria stood at the emergency department entrance, watching. Hayes was visible through the glass doors, frozen in place, still grappling with the destruction of everything he thought he knew. Amada raised her hand in a small wave. Maria waved back. Then Amada climbed into the vehicle and the doors closed behind her. As they pulled away, she looked out the window at Metro General Hospital, shrinking in the distance. She thought about the 3 weeks she had spent there trying to be someone she wasn't. She thought about the people who had mocked her, dismissed her, underestimated her. And she thought about the ones she had saved both on the battlefield and in that sterile operating room. Marcus's voice echoed in her memory one final time. Don't blame yourself. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't. The vehicle turned onto the highway, heading toward a new chapter. Behind her, the hospital disappeared from view. Ahead of her, The future waited. Amada Bennett, codename Ghost, was no longer running. She was moving forward. And somewhere she knew Marcus was smiling. Over the next 5 years, Amada Bennett trained more than 200 combat medics at the Naval Special Warfare Medical Training Facility. Her students went on to serve in every branch of special operations, carrying her techniques and her wisdom into battlefields around the world. They called her Ghost, not because she disappeared, but because the lessons she taught stayed with them long after she was gone. She never returned to combat. She never needed to. The lives her students saved became her legacy, her redemption, her peace. And that's Amada's story. The woman they laughed at turned out to be the most qualified person in the room. Sometimes the people who say the least have seen the most. If this story moved, you do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I share stories like this every week, and I'd hate for you to miss the next one. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.